a tempest over tea. It just so happened on that very same day, as the violence in Boston Parliament and King George over in London were trying to keep peace, they got rid of all important taxes except for one tiny tax on the British tea. They thought that would solve the problem, but it didn't. Lots of colonists resented paying any British taxes, so no matter how tiny. It was a matter of principle. Some refused to drink the British tea and drank the tea smuggled from Holland instead. Others, including George Washington, stopped drinking tea altogether. By 1773, the British East India Company had so much unsold tea sitting around that it was about to go broke. To keep this tea company in business, Great Britain's Prime Minister, Lord North, proclaimed that absolutely nobody except in the East India Company could sell any tea to America. To convince the colonists to buy tea, prices were set so low that even with the taxes, the company's tea lost less than any other tea sold in England or in America. The colonists loved tea, but most of them still thought this was taxation without representation. British tea either rotted in warehouses or got sent straight back to England. Before long, the royal governor of Massachusetts, Thomas Hutchinson, declared that unless the tax was paid, none of the tea shipped into Boston Harbor could be sent away. If the tea was not unloaded, ship commanders would force it on shore under the cover of their cannon's mouth. On the night of December 16, 1773, some Sons of Liberty covered their faces and their hands with coal dust, disguised themselves as Mohawk Indians, and very calmly filed on board these three ships filled with tea. Hundreds gathered to watch the men split open 342 chests of British Darjeeling tea with tomahawks and fed all 45 tons of it to the fish. Most of Britain were outraged when they heard the news of the wanton destruction. Americans were clearly a race of convicts. They had gone too far and must be punished. 6 months later, the king and the angry parliament closed the Boston Harbor. Nothing could come in and nothing could go out. George versus George. 1774 to 1775. The port closure quickly put huge number of Bostonians out of work. People were afraid they would starve. Other colonies scrambled to help by sending food, clothing, and flocks of sheep. Americans smuggled in at least 5,000 chests of tea from Holland alone. They also smuggled in gunpowder. Bostonians began to think of war. As the siege continued, people from all over the colonies became more and more alarmed. If Boston was such a sea of trouble, who was to say that worse things wouldn't happen in Philadelphia or Williamsburg or Charleston? George Washington did not approve of the Tea Party one bit, but he approved of the punishment even less. During September and October of 1774, delegates from all 13 colonies met together in one place for the first time ever at the First Continental Congress in Philadelphia. George Washington was one of the delegates. The Congress sent an appeal for peace and harmony to the King and George and suggested that the Parliament get rid of all the unconstitutional laws controlling America. Until then, the colonies would not import or buy any British goods and would not export any of their own goods to the mother country. British General Thomas Gage, Commander-in-Chief in America. Affairs here are worse than ever, even at the time of the Stamp Act. If you think 10,000 men are enough, send 20. The British Parliament. Charles Van. You will never meet with that proper obedience to the laws of this country until you've destroyed that nest of locusts. Patrick Henry. Our chains are forged, their clanking may be heard over on the plains of Boston. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. Samuel Johnson, the greatest English writer up to this day, of his day. How is it that we hear from the loudest yelps from the liberty from the drivers of Negroes? The New England governments are in a state of rebellion. Blows must decide whether they are subject to this country or independent. King George.